right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second task force to study the state workforce and retiring employees. I will ask for a motion. Well, we'll convene the meeting, and I will open the floor. I see that I have Senator Kushner. I do see Representative Mastro Francesco. I'm not sure who from the Senate should be here. Senator Kushner, who are we missing from Senate Republicans?
Well, I think Senator Sampson is the ranking member, so I know he was invited as our ranking.
Okay, I don't see him. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, welcome everyone to our second meeting for this task force on our state workforce and retiring employees. Looking forward to the conversation and the presentation that we have from Dr. Muhammad AlQadri and Tara Downs, Assistant State Comptroller. And at this time, I do see my ranking member. So hello, Representative Aurora. I will turn the floor over to Senator Kushner for welcoming remarks. And then I will also open that up for Representative Aurora and Representative Mastro Francesco.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you all again on this very near to Christmas Day. But I will keep my remarks just to, I look forward to the work that we have before us, and I want to wish everybody in advance a happy holidays.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Representative Aurora? You're muted. We can't hear you. Yeah, we're still not hearing you. You don't show as muted, but we can't audibly hear you. Okay, we'll let you work on that, and once you get that fixed, we'll come back to you. Representative Mastro Francesco. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Just wanted to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and have a happy, healthy New Year. And I'm sure we'll get this meeting going and get it wrapped up in no time. Thanks, Robin.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you. And I'm just looking to see if Senator Sampson joined us. And
I don't think, yeah, I don't think he's here today. He had he had a conflict in scheduling, so.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. All right, so we will move on to item number 3 on the agenda, which is the request for extension. And we did receive a letter from, I believe it was Monica Nugent, to extend our deadline to the beginning of session, which would be February the 9th, because our time constraints are a little restrictive for what we're trying to do. So at this time, I would open the floor and ask for a motion to accept the extension that will be submitted to myself and then to Senate and House leadership.
I'd be happy to make that motion. Or Monica should make the motion. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm happy to either make the motion to accept the extension or to second it if Dan wants to make the motion.
All right, so we'll say that motion by Mr. Livingston, second by Ms. Nugent. And we will go ahead and submit that to our leadership, not seeing any issues with that extension going through. And we'll also take a minute just to talk about the structure of the upcoming meetings that we have. We are looking to do this every 2 weeks and kind of stick to the date of Tuesday, which we started meeting, which would mean that our next meeting would be January the 4th, and we would look to have judicial and higher ed come on and have a discussion with us around this topic. And then on January the 18th, we would look to gain some input from employees and those receiving services and how retirements affect those services. And then the following meeting would be scheduled for February the 1st, which would allow us an opportunity for to review the final recommendations from this task force. And then finally, on February the 8th, the day before session begins, a special meeting to discuss the final report and adopt report and those recommendations made by this task force. So I guess I will just open the floor to make sure that those dates are good for everyone. and that we can commit to those dates so that we can keep this thing moving. All right, see a thumbs up. I see some head shakes. So I'm going to go ahead and say that we will send out notice for these upcoming meetings when they're due. And at this time, because I am anxious to hear this report that we have coming, I will just ask, is there any comments up to this point from anyone before we move on to Roman numeral 4 on the agenda? All right, seeing no hands, nobody's waving. I do see that we've been joined by my colleague in the House, Representative Fox. I will give you an opportunity to have some remarks and greet the task force members.
Good afternoon. Sorry for being late. Look forward to today's meeting and getting on with today's business. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Representative Fox. All right, so at this time, we do have a presentation by Dr. Muhammad AlQadri and Tara Downs. So I will pass the mic and let you guys take the floor.
Mute first. Hello, everyone. My name is Muhammad AlQadri. I'm a member of the task force, but when I'm not doing this, I'm also a professor of public policy. I'm the head of the Department of Public Policy at UConn, and I'm joined by Tara Downs, who is the assistant controller. Some of you already know her. About a couple of years ago, I would say maybe even 2.5 years ago, right before the pandemic, and after the pandemic, these days is what we're timing things. The Governor's Council on Women and Girls started doing this, or was appointed, and they wanted to do an analysis of the state workforce. So Tara and I got into the data, and we produced an initial report on representativeness of the state administration. And then that report, I believe, is the same as the one that Dan Levingston shared with everybody before the meeting. It was shared as part of the, here, let's see if I can you all see my screen now? All right.
Yep.
Excellent. So that's part one report. The second report that we did was on new hire data. And new hire data is very important for several reasons. But new hire data tells you what's going to happen, what's the workforce is going to look like 10 and 15 years down the road. If we have equity in the among new hires, we will likely have better equity in 15 years or in 10 years down the road. So equity is coming, is what new hire data tells you. So as you all know, we are expecting a retirement surge. There are about 8,100 people that are eligible to retire. 5,800 of them are expected to retire, according to the Boston study and some of the state controllers' estimates. These are only in state agencies. This does not include non-state executive agencies. These do not include higher ed, don't include judicial, don't include things that are not executive agencies, basically. So that, these retirements cause a risk to quality and availability of services, for sure. But there's also an opportunity to address the disparities in representation and past injustice in terms of representation. And there's also an opportunity to reorganize agencies to create more agile organizations. That does not necessarily mean smaller. That just means that we can reorganize to do things better as people retire and we replace them. So how do we get ready for the retirement tsunami? We have 5 questions that we're going to ask, and we're going to focus this presentation on the 5th of the questions. So the 5 questions are: do we have a good estimate of the size of the retirement tsunami, or will it just be a minor event? How are we responding to the tsunami? Are we refilling the positions or reorganizing the workforce? Are we keeping the same size? Are we having a smaller size? What is going to happen as we do that? The third question is, what leadership programs are preparing promising middle managers to move up into senior positions junior staff to move into middle management, and college graduates to move into starting positions in the workforce. So this is succession planning, right? It happens at all levels, not just at one level. And then the fourth question is, what pathways programs exist to allow us to recruit talent from the state and nationally? A lot of states have those sort of talent acquisition programs. New York has had one that's longer than the federal government's Presidential Management Fellowship, by the way. And a lot of states have those programs, and that allows you to bring in talent, not just from higher education institutions in the state, but also from all higher education institutions around the country. And then the fifth one, which is really the focus of this report, what is our strategy for ensuring that the new hires reflect the diversity of the state in terms of gender, race, and ethnicity? Meaning, are the people that is the replacement workforce representative of the state? We are not trying to correct prior injustices with the new hires here. We're just asking a simple question about whether or not there's parity in terms of gender, whether there's equal representation in terms of people of color in the workforce. And in order to do this, we looked at the last 5 years of new hires in the state, the last 3 years of new hires in the state, and the last year of new hires in the state, right? So we have actually a report that's coming out soon, but what I present here is a sample of what's in that report and the conclusion of the report. So Tara, all yours from here.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks to Dr. AlQadri for collaborating with our office on this. But just to give you an idea of what went into this, at the Comptroller's office, we sit on a lot of payroll data. And so the questions we asked were, do Connecticut's recent hire patterns, those hired within the last 5 years, perpetuate gender and/or racial ethnic disparities in certain types of occupations, or are we on better track? Is Connecticut on track to maintain gender parity and proportionate representation in the fields and positions where it has already achieved that? And where is Connecticut successfully making progress or falling short in moving towards a workforce that adequately reflects the people it serves?
My turn. Go ahead.
And so what we did is our payroll division pulled data on approximately 30,000 state employees. As Mohammed said, we don't have the best data for higher education, judicial, and legislative. So this is strictly for the executive branch. We pulled this data in March. We removed part-time employees from the data. So the final population was about 28,359. Absent, unlike the federal government and a lot of other public employers, we don't have a general schedule, they have the federal general schedule, which classifies people into 5 steps. We don't have that in state government. So we had to think about how are we gonna compare employees across different agencies. So what we did instead was we looked at our equal employment opportunity categories. We looked at agencies as a whole, and we looked at really large departments, like, for example, one correctional facility, looking at that as like a universe where a separate population of employees. So that's just an example of what we did in the absence of having a system like the federal government has. And Mohammed, I'll kick it back to you.
Great. So some of the benchmarking that we've done is, so we looked at the last 5 years of hires. Some of the benchmarking that we did is against the existing workforce. So what does the existing workforce look like for different populations? And the census to look at how, what portion of the population it belongs to each one of the groups that we studied, basically. So for an example, I highlighted the Hispanic here for everybody to look. So right now, 4% of the state workforce is Hispanic female, right? The population is 7% Hispanic female. So 7% of the Connecticut population is Hispanic female. 4% of the state workforce, in executive agencies, is Hispanic females. But among new hires in the last 5 years, only 2% is Hispanic females. So while we should be moving toward the 7%, ideally, right, in order to get that perfect representation, we want to move to the 7%. It looks like with new hires, we are moving a little bit backwards. Not a little bit, substantially backwards. So here's another thing that we did is we looked at the population. So this is the good news is that women in other states and in other workforces tend to be less represented in officials and administrator positions and less represented in professional positions. And that is not the case in the state of Connecticut, which is really good news for us, that we have at least some gender parity in some of these categories. So here, as you can see, the gender parity line is around the 50%. Officials and administrators among all the population is 51%. New hires, 48%. So we're pretty close still. And then among professionals, it used to be 60% in the full population. New hires are 62%. So, and this is a theme that's going to continue happening, is that what we were doing well, what we are doing generally well in terms of representation. So if the workforce, if an agency has a well-represented workforce, we continue to do well with new hires. If we had overrepresentation in the workforce, we continue to have overrepresentation among new hires. And if we had underrepresentation in the workforce, we continue to have underrepresentation among new hires. So this is really the message of this whole report, is that the new hires is not the new hire opportunities. We're talking about 6,000 people here in 5 years. We're not used in order to have some equity in them. So there wasn't equity among new hires. To try to change what's, the overall workforce at the end of the day. So this is administrative support. As you can see, women are overrepresented historically, not just here, but everywhere. 87% of administrative support is female. Among new hires, we're continuing that trend. We're at 83%. Slightly less, but it's 83% still. Ideally, we want it to be at 50%. 66% of paraprofessionals in the workforce are that, and then 72% are among new hires. Now, let's look at protective service, state police and other protective service in the state. 19% in the workforce, 19% of that workforce is female. Among new hires, it's exactly 19%. So not a lot of changes. We're not seeing that this opportunity to hire new people, to bring in a new wave of employees, is being used as an opportunity to hire a more representative workforce. Service maintenance and skilled craft, again, same problem. So where we had overrepresentation, we continue to have overrepresentation. Where we had underrepresentation, we continue to have underrepresentation. Almost the same. So this is in the largest agencies where we had overrepresentation. Department of Children and Families, again, historically a female-dominated workforce, continued to be female-dominated, even more so among new hires. Department of Social Services, same thing. DOC, Inmate Medical Services, same thing. Where we had underrepresentation, highway operations, the workforce is 7% female, continued to be 7% female among new hires. Police services, engineering and construction actually went down, where the national trend is that it's going up, not down. It went down in that case. And DOC facility, McDougall, from 19 to 10%. So I think you get the point here. This is a white representation. Let me focus a little bit on Hispanic representation, because I think this is one of the areas that have the biggest challenges, I think, for state government is Hispanic representation. DCF, for instance, it was 18% Hispanic. The population is around 17% to be exact, Hispanic. 18% of DCF was Hispanic in the overall population. Among new hires, we continued to be 18%. So for CT, technical education and career system, we used to be at 8%. The new hires are at 8% exactly. Police services, 6% used to be Hispanic in the overall workforce. And in the last 5 years, the new people that we hired were only 7% Hispanic. Bureau of Engineering and Construction, we had a substantial jump there, which is really positive. But CVH continued to be at 8%. And we had a substantial change in McDougall as an agency. So we also looked at compensation. So this is the white male salary line as a reference. It is in academia, we never want to use the white male as the reference, but we did it for the sake of this study. So we took the white male salary and said, that's 100%. Let's look at how everybody compares to that. All right. So white females are doing actually better than white males in the workforce. Black males are doing overall, historically, 85% in the overall workforce. Among new hires, about 89%. Among black females, black females in the workforce make about 91% of white male salary, while among new hires, it's 96%. So this is really an improvement here. For Hispanic males, we used to be at 84% overall. This is the existing workforce. And 88% among new hires, new hires make 88% of white male salary, basically. And Hispanic females, 91%, or Hispanic females make 90 overall in the workforce, make 91% of what a white male makes on average. Among new hires, it's 94% now. And Asian male and Asian female, of course, is a little bit higher, as you can see. So we also looked at, let's say this is protective services. We looked just at protective services here and what's going on with protective services as a category. So white male salary is the 100% again. White females make almost the same as white males. Black males make substantially less in the full population of state employees in executive agencies, but new hires make 95%. So there's some improvement here. We're still not 100%, but some improvement. Same from black females, Hispanic males, 88% they used to make. Now they make 95% among new hires, and so on and so forth. All right. In the officials and administrators categories, we're going to share these slides, I think, with everybody after this. So I want to get to the main point here that we're trying to make. So the whole point is that agencies that have historically done well in terms of representation continue to do well. Agencies that have struggled with representation continue to struggle with representation. So we took all the male-dominated agencies, that's agencies where more than 51% of the workforce is male. We put them together and we said, what's happening to Black female representation in these male-dominated organizations? These organizations are almost half of the workforce, about 11,000, a little bit less than half, maybe 40% of the workforce in state agencies, right? So overall, historically, 5.1% of that workforce was Black female. Okay, so this is only looking at male-dominated agencies here. Among new hires in the last 5 years, 4.3% were Black female. And overall, 4.9%, in the last 3 years, 4.9%, and in the last year, it's only 3.7%. So instead of using, same for Hispanic females, they used to be at 3.2%, while in the population, that should be about 7 or 8%, right? The overall in the workforce, 3.2% of the overall workforce, the 11,000 people here that we're talking about, are Hispanic females. Among new hires in the last 5 years, only 3.3%, 3 years, 3.4%, and 1 year is 2.8%. The message that we see here is that we're not being strategic in how we refill the positions that are becoming available. So this is really the main message, is that if we have done well in the past, we continue to do well. If we have not, we are not using this as an opportunity to have better representation in the workforce. So the conclusion is exactly that. This is only a sample of the results that we presented in this report. We actually have the full tables and the appendices for each of the agencies as well. Can we share that, Tara? What's the plan on sharing that?
Yeah, we can absolutely share it. Through the Council on Women and Girls, we've shared it with members of that council and several agencies. So,
Christian, am I calling people?
I'll do that. I just want to thank you for that, you and Tara, for that presentation and that information. It certainly answers a couple of questions that I had off the top of my head. And I do see Mr. Spencer has his hand raised, so you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, appreciate that. So my question is on the salary comparisons. So are those, I know you're talking about, those are average salaries across the entire field, or is there anything done to make sure comparing like positions, comparing, someone at an entry level position that's been hired versus someone that's been there for 10 years?
So they're average positions. I mean, I think that's a very good question, because the old, especially on gender, the old argument was that men have been in the workforce longer and therefore earn more money. So we could adjust it for experience, but that hasn't been the case in a long time. I mean, women have been graduating from higher education institution at a faster pace than men, and honestly, new people coming into the workforce are sometimes earning more than people who have been in the workforce. So I do that analysis across the country, and I have published work on this, and it's really, experience is increasingly becoming less important in terms of salary for those two reasons, especially when you're looking at gender.
Understood. No, I appreciate that. And, looking at that might be, if there is progress being made over the past 5 years, as you're saying here, maybe there is still some lag time before some of those that shows up in the average salaries, if, not adjusting for that experience level. But I appreciate.
And remember, that issue becomes less important also for the new hires, because they're
all new.
Right, they're all new. They all have one year of experience, or 3 years or 5 years, depending on what we're looking at.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kushner?
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. It was really useful. I think one of the things we heard last time we met from DAS is that with centralization of human resources, that there is the opportunity to be more intentional and track hiring around these issues of diversity in a better way. But clearly it's a new system, so I'm not sure that there's documentation of that. But I think that drawing attention to this moment where we're going to have an opportunity to hire a lot of new people, I draw the conclusion from your presentation that unless we are intentional about it, unless we have a program for it, it will not happen. It won't happen naturally or on its own. And I think that it confirms what we've kind of always known. But I think that having that data is really helpful to us to make it clear we have to do something different now. So I appreciate that. It's more of a comment than a question, but I do have a question, because given your background and experience, I have two questions. Do you feel like you're in a possession or a resource, both the controller's office and from the university, to help formulate a program that would be more intentional? Is that something that you've considered doing, been asked to do, undertaken in other places? I think it would be helpful for us to know if that's an option.
Well, I'm going to let Tara respond, but I'm going to say a couple of things about decentralization. So centralizing HR, this is not an HR issue. This is a management issue. So this is something where decentralization doesn't really help much. This is a place where decentralization could help more. Decentralization and reporting could help more than centralization. And I'm not talking about HR, because this is not about decentralizing who processes applications and who processes retirement things. And that's a different discussion, I think. I mean, I heard what the deputy commissioner said last time, and I've always looked at this, and a lot of places that are seeing progress, like the federal government and Massachusetts and places like that, have decentralized the responsibility for ensuring that new hires are reflecting the diversity of the state as they did that. So Tara, do you want to?
No, I think jumping on to what you're saying is that because you can see that this is an agency, this varies from agency to agency. There are the agencies that have good representation, and there are those that are struggling. It may or may not be because, there may be a workforce challenge that they are facing in terms of recruiting, but there really can't be so much a one program. It has to be an agency by agency program, because, state police are going to have a totally different need than, a state comptroller's office, or recruiting for IT versus recruiting for police protective service. So it's going to have to be an agency by agency strategy. And so the question is how to get there.
I think that's very helpful, the way you both expressed it, because I think, again, if we don't have a plan and if we aren't intentional about how we get the different agencies to do that, your point is the centralization will not make any difference, basically. And that's more of a, it might make a difference in that we find it easier to track, but we're not looking for improvement in tracking as much as we're looking for improvement in outcomes. Thank you. And the other question I have, which I don't think you need to answer in depth right now, but I was interested in that first slide you had, because the 5 areas, I think, of questions that you raised, the very first one, I think, is one that we need to come back to and have more, another conversation about, because we really do need to, a key focus is how do we address the cliff that is approaching, and are we really prepared? And the other charge of this task force, I think, is to look at compression in managerial salaries. And I wondered if we looked at that element within the diversity scope, would we find, other issues that might not be identified by looking at the agency as a whole? So that's actually 2 questions. I cheated, but I think both are important.
We agree.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We
You're
did not look
welcome.
at
Thank
salary compression issues, by the way. I mean, we really just wanted to see whether, if we left things on their own, if we let things happen like they've been happening over the last 5 years, what will we have in terms of a future workforce? I think,
Right.
will time, this is the, people who have done on gender research, will time solve this problem? And the answer here is time will not solve this problem.
I think we'll agree on that. And great points. I think there's a serious concern around the succession planning and having the training programs and the leadership programs in place so that we can have smooth transitions. As people transition out, we actually have people in-house that are qualified and ready to go into these positions And you made a really good point that I want to reiterate, Dr. AlQadri, that, it's not an HR issue. The cliff ahead is about that, what you stated, but also about the impact that it's going to have on services to our residents and their families, especially the most vulnerable and marginalized people. So I want to, and then to mention the other piece that I thought about in reading your report is the impact. I don't think we've been talking about this, but I want us to be mindful of the impact that this is going to have on the workers that are left behind, right? The workers that are still working, that are going to be burned out and overworked due to this cliff reduction in the workforce. So let's pay special attention to that as well, and just keep that in mind as we move on in the discussion. And up next, Representative Aurora, you have the floor, to be followed by Monica, but I also want to acknowledge that my good colleague from the Labor Committee, Representative Vargas, has joined us. You have the floor, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? Great. I had to change the mic there. Dr. AlQadri, thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask a few questions regarding base rate, because, numbers are sometimes quite, can be tricky. While we all agree with some of the concerns which we all have, as a matter of fact, these are shared concern, the base rate concern is a very important thing, because we have to hire from the pool of workers or the pool which exists. I'm going to tell you, I graduated as electrical engineer in 1991. There were 18% women in my class. My wife graduated, several years later, 1997 or 98. There were actually less than that in her class, electrical, and she was also an engineer, a chemical engineer. I have a friend, she's graduating about, she graduated a few years ago, and she said there were about 20% women in her class, in her civil engineering class. So if you want to hire a civil engineer, you're going to have 80% men, 20% women. And you're very right in saying we should work. I'm always encouraging my daughter to be an engineer, and my boys want to be engineers. For a guy, I can't understand why, despite my encouragement, it goes the other way around. So my question to you is that we always have to consider the base rate. The numbers which you gave us did not give us the base rate. How many people want to be, in this country and in the side of freedom, you can be who you want to be. If more people men want to be policemen, and I can tell you from action figures, that's basically how our society kind of encourages that. And 90% of the nurse practitioners happen to be women. And again, you might basically, we can work on. So I think it's important to consider the base rate as to, are we hiring in our state agencies what reflects not the actual composition of our population, but the actual composition in that workforce. So base rate assumption, I don't know whether you had time to think about that, or whether you think that's a rounding error. That's one. And the second thing I would like to ask you is that, or perhaps if you don't mind discussing that, then I have a small follow-up.
So, you're absolutely, this is not an afterthought. The pool of available applicants for a position is a serious problem. It's actually one of the 5 issues that I see, or more, one of the issues I pointed to in the email that Senator Kushner and Representative Robbins shared actually brought that up. There's a workforce issue. The workforce that's available to take on these jobs is an issue that we all have to tackle. We did not look at that as part of this study, but it is largely, Representative Aurora, it's largely part of the recommendation that these solutions have to be agency by agency solutions. Now, it might be hard to come up with more than 22% is the percentage today of female students in engineering schools, right?
Still, 20 years later.
22%. It's not much higher. And there are challenges for that. It doesn't mean that we give up. I think it means that we look at some of the strategies so some engineering firms are using to recruit people, to create scholarship programs, to put women through engineering schools and hire them afterwards and have them commit to so many years of service for the state. There are many ways to do that, but it's also the solution is also a agency by agency and career path by career path solution. It is hard for us to say that we cannot find 500 women to go into the police academy. I mean, it is 500 high school graduates. It's got to be, if we made an effort, we could probably find 500 women in the state of Connecticut who are willing to go into the police academy. If we created the culture to nurture them in the police academy and to welcome them into the police academy, and if we went to high schools and made presentations and brought in some really good state police officers who are women into high schools to talk about a career as a police officer, we could probably talk some 500 high school graduates that are women into joining the police workforce or some other fields. So I think the solution is career path by career path, not even agency by agency. So within each agency, the agency lead should be looking at each career path and make the decisions and not just give up based on the available pool. There are strategies to improve the pool, I think, and they should be engaging in that. And public sector employment has always been more attractive to women than men. And we should be having a higher percentage of women engineers in the public workforce than the private sector does, than the regular pool is.
Dr. AlQadri, that the two different conversations, and perhaps for the interest of time, one is of the base workforce, and sometimes that gets into social engineering. If more men want to be soldiers and more women want, I'm not going to basically sit here and I don't think that's what we want to discuss. Right. But what we want to do is make sure that women should be very welcome and men should be welcome as nursing jobs and women should be welcome. There should be no discrimination against women in engineering job and no discrimination against men in nursing job. That is our duty. But in terms of the base force definition, as I said, it's been very hard, 20%. There could be reasons which we don't understand, or we do understand that those are very difficult ones. But what I do want to basically focus is leadership. Because what I would have liked her to see is, where are we on leadership? Because in leadership, we have found that it's extremely important to have all points of views, right? And it's not it's not an option. In engineering, I will tell you, if you are a woman engineer today, you're going to go into computer science. You're not going to go into civil engineering. And I would recommend you to do that because that's a rational choice. A civil engineering as a woman is an unlikely situation to happen. And that's a rational choice. Now, whereas when you talk about leadership, we would love to learn as to, in Connecticut state leadership, do we have equal number of representation? And it could be okay that the police force person who leads is a man, but however, a DCF is or the Department of Social Service, DSS, is a woman, that's fine. But overall leadership, do we have some of that, or maybe the top 5 people in each agency? And is there enough of a dispersion there, or a adequate representation? Because I do know, and I'm going to end with saying one thing, that if you go to IT, information technology, 1 out of 5 men are going to look like me. Or 1 of 5 recruits, men or women, they're going to look Indian American, because that's the nature of our workforce at this point. In IT, information technology, whether you want the person in the server room or whether you want a person working for leadership in Microsoft, it's going to be likely Indian American. That's just the base workforce. But I want to kind of refocus here on leadership, because that's where I think we should be focused on. And ask, are we making sure that our leadership is well represented across these what forms our community?
Thank you, Representative Aurora. Next, we have Monica Nugent.
Hi, good afternoon. I apologize. I'm having some connectivity issues, so I'm going to keep my camera off to save some bandwidth today. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. This presentation has been really, really insightful, and I think in many ways has been somewhat of a stark difference from what we heard at our last meeting in terms of some of the things that we heard the administration is working on and things that we'll be able to accomplish when actually looking at this study. And so one of the questions that I had a follow-up was actually right at the beginning of the presentation. You had made a comment that based on the BCG report, that it is estimated that 5,800 of the eligible 88,000+ employees are going to retire. And that is vastly different from what the administration had told us at our last meeting, where they were not expecting nearly as many of those retirements to happen. And I understand if you don't have any comments on that, but my question is do you know why there might be such a difference in opinion between, this study that you've done with the comptroller's office compared to what DAS is reporting?
So I was not present for the last meeting, but I think you may have been talking about, based on what Dr. AlQadri told me, that you may have been talking about what we know about intents to retire, which is different because not everybody files an intent to retire before they retire. A lot of people just file as soon, when they're ready. So the numbers in our report are actually based on a combination of what we know in the comptroller's office about who's eligible, and a survey that the administration had hired BCG to do, the CREATES report, which basically in any given year, and I refer everybody back to the CREATES report for this exactly because I'm shooting from the hip here, but my understanding is there are about 8,000+ people in the executive branch who are eligible to retire by 2022. And so how do you know who of those people are going to retire? So I think BCG did a survey of state employees about their intents. In a typical year, I believe it's something like a quarter of the people who are eligible to retire might retire. But based on the BCG report, they predict it's going to be much higher, like 75%. Again, I refer back to the CREATES report, but that's where that 5,000 number comes from. So not scientific, not definite, but based off of a survey taken that BCG did of state employees about their intentions.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I guess I'm just confused then why, because they were looking at intent to file for retirement. But if I misunderstood the presentation, someone can please correct me. But from my understanding of what Deputy Commissioner Herms was saying was that they're really expecting like a couple thousand to retire based on like the trends that they're seeing, and that they're not planning on seeing this mass exodus, and they're kind of basically not really that concerned about it. So it's just, yep.
Monica, I call that worrisome in my email to you all. I think that is worrisome because there's 700 people who have filed for retirement so far. There are 8,100 that are eligible. We're only talking about state agencies. We're not talking about the state workforce.
Correct.
Overall, we're talking just about state executive agencies here.
Mm-hmm.
So there are 8,100 that are eligible to retire. There are real incentives for people to retire. And if 75% is a conservative estimate, I think, because here there are real incentives for people to retire. So the percentage is likely to be higher even than that, if anything. So I think it would be unwise to think that we're going to have anything like we had in prior years, because in prior years, those incentives did not exist. People could retire in 2020 or 2021, and they would have the same benefits. But in this case, if you retire in 22, you have different benefits than retiring in 23. So there are real incentives here for people to, it's a choice. It's a fork in the road for employees, and those eligible are going to have to make a smart decision about that. This is not unintentional. I think. I mean, I think this is the intent is to get people to make that decision.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so thank you for that. And so I guess my, final comment, if I may, is, anecdotally from our membership, we're hearing a lot of concern about, the number of people who are eligible to retire and who have not necessarily filed their intent to retire, but will be retiring and leaving a major gap in institutional knowledge. For example, I have a number of members in DOT. And the interesting thing about DOT is that you can be eligible to retire, but then you can still go on and do a job consulting and make about 3 times as much as they were making at DOT. So why wouldn't they do that and not lose their benefits and still make somewhat of an income as a consultant with less stress, less work, possibly better hours and more pay? So I think we really have our work cut out for us in terms of, figuring out the numbers and succession planning and all of that. But again, thank you. The presentation was really, really insightful. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Monica. The only thing that I will add to what you were saying, Dr. AlQadri, is not just the incentives that are in place that are financial, and that's a big deal right now, but this pandemic. So I think it's really wise for us to take all of that into consideration. People, and I've heard this anecdotally myself, people that were not considering retirement are actually retiring. They're not just considering it. I've got a couple of friends that went ahead and retired during this pandemic because of financial incentives on their job and looking at retirement, and security coming out of a job with decades of service. So I just want us to, be mindful of that as well. Up next, we have Danny Livingston. Mr. Livingston, you have the floor.
Thank you. And thank you both for your presentation. I guess I have a few comments that I want to make and invite your thoughts about. But the first thing is that I think we're in the middle of a vicious cycle here in terms of likelihood of retirement. I think the financial incentives, and I want to follow up on what Representative Porter said. The financial incentives are there. They're perhaps not as large as some people think they are, but what they are combined with is the tremendous understaffing that exists in many of our agencies, which leads to burnout and demoralized workforce. And so people are more likely to retire if they're burned out and demoralized. And then, of course, you produce even more understaffing. And so, the 5 questions that you all put up front, I would suggest that there's the 6th question to ask: are we properly staffed now before the tsunami? Because if we're understaffed now and we're about to have a tsunami, it's going to get a lot worse. And then, like I said, I think it feeds on itself, because I do think you're going to see, particularly in healthcare, particularly in corrections, particularly in children's services, where people are being mandated overtime and double, triple shifts. You're going to see people leave who might stay if they had more coworkers. If we were hiring now and filling jobs now, and they could relax and see their families, people who might stay would. I think are otherwise leaving. So I think that's I think it's really important that we look at that. I think on the diversity issues, and we have a racial justice committee in CVAC that has been working on some of these things, and I think one of the things that would be really prudent there, and maybe could be extended into gender equity as well, is looking at, are we doing career training? Have we started career training in ways that are going to help with diversity issues? Like, for instance, in healthcare, 1199 in its nursing home industry has recognized that nurses, LPNs, RNs, that tends to be on race, tends to be primarily white. Those are the higher paid positions. They're mostly white. And then CNAs are lower paid positions, and they're mostly black. And that if we don't provide training opportunities for CNAs to get the right letters after their name, because we have tremendously talented people who don't have the right letters after their name and therefore cannot be put into the higher paid positions. And so they have a great program in the nursing home industry that does this. We don't have that in the state. 1199 hasn't been able to get that on the state side. So again, if you look at the state workforce represented by 1199, so that's healthcare workers, their NP6 unit, non-professional unit, primarily people of color, lower paid jobs. Their P1 unit, primarily white folks, higher paid jobs. So one thing I would really ask us to look at is, have we started the kind of training programs that are really going to create the diversity in the higher ranks? And I'm talking about professional positions, primarily, that we need to try to achieve. The second thing, in terms of, you made some comments about centralization. One place where I would like to, because I'm a big proponent of decentralization. I agree with what you said, Dr. I'm going to say your name wrong, but AlQadri. That decentralization is often a better way to deal with this. But we did bring to the administration the idea of creating an inspector general for racial justice that would report directly to the governor and to union representatives who would be accountable for identifying systemic barriers to racial justice inside state government and proposing systemic ways to eliminate them, working with all the different agencies, but reporting on a centralized basis. And I know you've worked on this around the country, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about either of those ideas as we approach the 2022 date.
I think that's a great idea. I also want to add that it's there's a strain on the people who remain in the workforce, but we also have to remember that there's a true workforce development problem for public sector employees. The focus so far has been in the state on private sector employees, but there's a real public sector employees. I bet you if every finance officer in the state retired tomorrow, local governments would hire them within a day or two, and they would snap them up. So there's competition. I mean, local governments don't have finance directors and are having problems with hiring finance directors in the state, and they're looking for them anywhere. If they can get somebody with 10 years OPM or state controller's office experience or other state employees that have that experience, they're going to snap them up. So there's competition for that. But
if I could just respond on one thing, that you see that in the skill trades too, exactly the same thing.
I think decentralization we're talking about decentralization of management, not decentralization of HR. So I don't have a position on decentralizing or centralizing HR, but this is decentralizing managing the recruitment process and setting the priorities for agencies. But that also has to be accompanied with some kind of control or some kind of reporting, and having a central place like an inspector general or somebody in the governor's office to oversee that would be good. Honestly, with annual reports.
Is that ended for you, Mr. Livingston? You're done with your comments and questions?
I don't promise forever, but I promise for now.
I'll take it. Sonia Morale, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you again for being on this task force, because this is important work. I have a couple of sentiments based on today's discussion. The first being, as a former state employee, state division director, state manager, and agency legal counsel for a number of agencies, I will agree with the sentiment in your findings that there are some agencies that historically have been known as diverse agencies. So there are some that, people know that there's diversity in this agency, and there are others, unfortunately, are not as diverse, and they have that reputation. And I think this gets us to, in your findings result, the need for additional bias and unconscious bias training. So from the managerial perspective, when an interview is to take place, you're required to have standardized questions for each of the panelists, for each of the interviewees. And the committee of individuals who are to serve on the task force or the interview panel are supposed to represent the agency, and it's supposed to be diverse. But again, if you don't have diversity, that's tough. And so what ends up happening on that process, unfortunately, you can have a little bit of unconscious bias occurring. And so you can perpetuate that either lack of diversity or diversity in that agency. So if you have an agency that's extremely diverse, welcoming and inclusive, and you're going to see hiring of extremely diverse candidates, because who's on the panel, what is the culture of the organization? So that there may be some opportunities there for additional unconscious bias training that I don't think occurs. There are additional steps after the interview where it goes to affirmative action to review the panel. But again, look at what your recruitment efforts were from the beginning, and the diversity from an affirmative action standpoint is based on who were the interviewees. So if I'm only applying to an agency because it's a diverse agency, well, you're going to have more diverse candidate pool. And so when you're looking at the numbers and the representation of who was selected, it's going to be based on that candidate pool, not who wasn't in the candidate pool. So you kind of create this slippery slope of diversity, equity, and unconscious bias issues. And I think your statistics resulted in that finding, which I've experienced. The other thing, so I think one of the solutions to that is really looking at cross agency interview panels. So for instance, if I'm hiring for an agency legal counsel, there's nothing stopping me from bringing in attorneys from another agency to sit on that panel who do similar work, maybe different type of legal issues, but similar work. Same will be true for situations such as an administrative assistant or even a police officer position. So you can have cross-agency panels sit together and follow the same standardized process, but a more diverse panel of individuals who either are from the agency or also who are external to the agency. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the salary compression issue, and I did reference this in my prior communication on this last month's meeting, is that adds to it. So when we look at the CCT programs, that's the career training programs, CTT programs that are in place, where they basically bring in a recent college graduate. And the goal of this is to create longevity with that graduate, bring in someone who just graduated from school, typically either a master's or a bachelor's degree, have them start in a role, and then after 2 years, their salary increases. But if you look at these salaries, $40,000 for someone with a master's degree, you can't track a diverse candidate who already has maybe an extreme amount of student loans just because of the historical wealth gap that's occurred to hire in the same position as someone who's making $70,000, but you're paying them as a CCT at a $40,000 salary. So there has to be a review of those salaries. They're just not equitable. And I think that restricts someone who would be interested in state employment when they see that entrance salary level with a master's degree, student loans. In 2021, for a master's degree student to make $40,000 is unheard of. I know there's a lot happening, but you can't compete with the market at that rate. So that may be something else to be considered. Then what ends up happening, because of the salary compression issues, you've brought them in at this lower salary. And so you have this gap that's going to occur from employees who were not under the program, but may have already worked in the agency for years, not having a master's degree. They're going to fare below their salary ranges because our salaries aren't moving up at a decent rate. So even when they bump up, they're still behind the individuals who've just had longevity in the agency. So that's something else to be considered as far as looking at the salary. But I thank you for your work on the study, and I think it's adequate findings based on the experience that I've had, and I know of other colleagues who've worked in state government.
Thank you for those comments, Sonia. Up next, we have Representative Vargas. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The two takeaways I take from the good doctor's presentation was, one, that those agencies that have done a good job historically in terms of diversity are continuing that track, and the ones that haven't done such a great job are not. Now, Representative Aurora brings up a fact in terms of the base or the bench and how many people are available at the base in terms of addressing perhaps some specific agencies that have some specific needs. So I think just thinking aloud, I think then we require a two-pronged approach. One, similar to the last speaker who talked about the importance of changing the culture within the agencies in terms of the approach of interviews, et cetera, recruitment efforts. And then the other one, which is expanding the base or the bench of people that are qualified. So I think that requires a two-pronged approach on behalf of the recommendations that this committee makes in terms of addressing possible future shortages, which I think, listening to Danny Livingston, those shortages are already here by the fact that people are getting burned out doing the job of 2 or 3 individuals on their own. Perhaps that'll be one of the reasons why we may even have more retirees than we're expecting. And that, and of course, the pressures brought about by the pandemic. Now, in terms of the issue that Representative Aurora talked about, which is the base, that's been cyclically addressed in many different ways. I remember when I was a young college student, there was a program called Teacher Corps, a federally funded program. There was a teacher shortage at the time. And basically what they did was they paid for your tuition in your senior year. If you had 3 years worth of credits, you could finish your senior year in the program, and they would pay for your tuition and give you a small stipend as an encouragement. I took advantage of that program and I became a teacher in that program. And I think it's been addressed around the world in many different ways. Even a poor country like Cuba, which has so many different problems, they decided to address the doctor shortage and created programs. And now they're one of the countries, despite the fact it's a developing country, that has so many doctors that they're able to assist other countries with medical teams at times of crisis. So I think these are not insurmountable problems. In terms of the issue that Representative Aurora brought about, not wanting to engage in social engineering, I agree up to a point that you don't want to really force people's hands into particular jobs or job categories or professions. But there are many people that would like to enter a profession given the opportunity. And those kinds of programs that create those kinds of opportunities are needed. And people, of course, will voluntarily decide if they have the vocation to that kind of job. I think incentives alone don't decide people's vocational choices. I think they are permissive in the sense that they allow people to make those choices, but I don't think that they necessarily force people's hands into those choices. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Vargas. And the only thing that I'll add to that is, I'm listening and I've heard it over and over, and there's this word that keeps resonating about, the culture. And I think that is really significant in this discussion because there are plenty of women that I know that not only want to be firefighters and police officers, but have made it in, but never made it through. And it's because of the culture. It's because of the discrimination on all levels that women face in those kind of male-dominated careers. So that's something to consider as well as we have this conversation. Next up, we have Mr. Callahan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Dr. AlQadri, there have been a number of points made as we've gone through this, and I think your point about management being leadership is a key point. HR has a role in that as far as the outreach in the delivery of the recruitment services. But there's a third prong here too. The labor market right now is very strained. I think in your letter to the committee, you mentioned, we are competing with other entities, government entities, municipalities has been mentioned on this call. There's a public policy issue as far as getting people in the pipeline. I think that's critical to this. And again, it spills over when we talk about diversity and women in non-traditional work roles that I've been involved in both in corrections and DOT, trying to recruit. And so that is as Representative Aurora said, a base number And he's certainly to point out, I was going to point out that 20% of engineering graduates are women. I guess it's up to 22% right now, but the latest numbers I had was 20.8, I think. So there are challenges there, but the public policy of where we're going to put our resources and where we're going to develop the next generation of the workforce is critical in this entity too, because we're all competing against each other. Towns are stealing from us. We're stealing from towns. And so there is a circular nature of what's occurring right now as far as everybody competing for the same labor resources. That does talk to salary adjustments. I came in as a CCT. I benefited from that program greatly. I was thrown into a lot of work early on. It led to management by experience. I understand that pays lower, but it also is a good entry gate for people to come in. Your thoughts on the public policy issue of what we need as far as training and getting people into those types of pipelines. I just like to hear any thoughts you think about any community-based programs or any kind of programs you see that would give us a greater labor market going forward, especially as we're in an aging state also, and we're losing our young people. I think that could be the next generation.
We have the only accredited Master of Public Administration program in the state of Connecticut. And we graduate about 60 or 70 and another 20 Master of Public Policy students. So about 80 some students each year. And we have 100% employment rate. And if we graduated 500 every year, we would probably have the 100% employment post-graduation rate. And they're all getting good jobs. They're getting jobs that I wish I had when I graduated from my master's program many years ago. So I think there's a public policy challenge, I think. I think there are partnerships that could be struck. I think we're happy to partner with the state in terms of helping bring people up to, in terms of designing leadership programs and doing things like that. We're a state agency. We're not trying to make a buck here, but we're happy to lend a hand to the extent that we have the capacity to do that. But there are also partnerships that could be struck along those lines. I mean, it doesn't have to be only us. It could be other people. You could recruit people who are missing one or two skills and just work with them over the first year to get them up there in terms of that skill. You could have management programs to put people through, management certificates or management programs or project leadership programs and things like that. So there are a lot of opportunities. There's a tool bag, I think, that could be put together. And the problem is we should not have the same tools for every agency. I think we should have a tool bag of some sort that we present to folks, maybe as a task force, and say, here's the tool bag. Now we have 30 different stories in state executive agencies alone. I mean, God knows what's happening with non-state executive agencies, with non-executive agencies, I mean. But in executive agencies, we have 30 different stories, and let every agency come up with their own response plan for what tools they want to use out of that tool bag, and what kind of continuous improvement program they want to have. I mean, I hope nobody engages in social engineering. It's not something I'm not in favor of that, Representative Arora, I promise. I care deeply about giving people choices, but I also care deeply about letting women know that there are careers beyond the ones that they grow up learning that are the careers for women. I mean, I would welcome my daughter getting a high school presentation from a female police officer that tells her, look, there's a great career for women in the police force. Why aren't you applying? And hope nobody ever sends her to a camp that forces her to become a police officer.
And to follow up on that, that is something we had the resources to do. Back when I was in corrections, we used to do that. We used to go to high schools before they were even eligible to become a correction officer. We'd get in there. You know, when Dan Livingston talks about the understaffing, that becomes harder to do without the resources. And I think we may want to look at tapping into retirees, especially the group that's going to go in the next year or so, to take some of that knowledge retention and to apply them to the pipeline issues that exist. You know, either being as part of interviewing, recruitment, selection, training, absolutely. They could be a good resource, I think, as far as, you know, we pay 75% sometimes when they leave of their last rate or of whatever the going rate would be. But those are things I think we need to look towards. But thank you for your presentation. I think it is right on point.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I'm looking, I don't see any hands. Are there any further questions or comments from any of the members or either one of the presenters? Monica, yes, you have the floor.
Yes, I just wanted to comment that I'm not exactly sure how we're going to move forward with like what recommendations we're going to include in the report, but I think it would be important to note, and Devin, if you could just kind of like asterisk this for a conversation for us to follow up on. I think it would be a really wonderful recommendation to put in the report about this toolkit project, you know, basically looking at this agency to agency approach and figuring out what kind of partnerships or training programs the agencies need. I personally, I think that would be a really great recommendation on our end to include in that report.
I absolutely agree, Monica. And I was going to make the suggestion that the recommendations that have been shared today, you know, after the presentation, as well as any recommendations that anyone may think of in between now and our next meeting, I would ask that information, those recommendations go to Devin, the clerk, so that we can get that out to everyone. And I would really love to see one list compiled of recommendations that we can make from the information that we received today during this presentation, also from the presentation given by DAS. So that's just a little bit of homework for us. If you haven't made any recommendations today during this meeting, please consider, you know, giving these presentations further thought so that we can draft the recommendations and bring them back before the full committee. I did want to just touch on some things really quick before I call on Representative Aurora around some of the things that were mentioned, because, you know, and what you stated there was, you know, we need a better estimate, right? It's been stated we have about 700 that are already on record. We have over 8,000 that are, you know, eligible, and that we needed a better estimate around the nature of the cliff, right? Some of the positions are going to be more critical than the other positions. You know, I really do believe that's something that we need to take a real hard look at and kind of discern where we want to, if and where we want to target our certain positions that we see as more critical. Because when I looked over it, you know, you stated the retirees are going to be, you know, social workers, prosecutors, state police, correctional officers, public health professionals during a pandemic and even post-pandemic. That's concerning. Transportation professionals, procurement specialists, IT professionals. So it runs the gamut. You know, we're not talking about a small sector here. This is across several sectors. And then the other thing is, you know, the plan for if we have to take a fall, right? We're talking about a cliff. And I'm hoping that we don't take the fall. But if we do take the fall, you know, what does the bottom of that cliff look like? That was the question that you presented, right? And what do we do if we have to take that fall? I think this task force should be prepared to make some recommendations around that as well. And with that, I will give Representative Aurora the floor. And Dr. AlQadri, if you wanted to respond to that, anything about that beforehand, you could do so. You're muted.
Yeah, I mean, we just have to get more information, I think, about that. The state might not have the full picture in a central place, but I bet you if you ask the chief state's attorney how many prosecutors they're expecting to lose, he will give you that within 5 minutes, because they know who's intending to leave. People at the I mean, this is one of the things where decentralization helps is I knew who's retiring 2 years ago. I mean, I knew who of my colleagues or people who work in my department were retiring because they already told me that. They didn't fill out paperwork. HR didn't know. And when the university asked me who's retiring, I told them. And there are ways to figure out who's leaving and create a plan for. It's going to take us 2 years. It takes a year to train a prosecutor. It takes a year before they can take a first chair. What is our plan? What are we doing if 20% of the prosecutors are leaving? Does that mean that it's going to impact our entire criminal justice system? If 20% of social workers retire, can you imagine what's going to happen to an overstressed workforce there?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I would ask, I see we have Lee Hansen on from the Office of Legislative Research. If it's not you, I think it's you. If we could petition the Chief State's Attorney Office for that information, that would be great. I'm sorry, you had a little echo, Lee.
I'm sorry, we can ask them for that information.
All right, thank you. Good to see you. All right, Representative Aurora, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I actually second your concern about the critical role analysis. And, while I fully agree with Dr. AlQadri that knowledge base resides more with the individual agencies, I think we need, perhaps as part of this task force, we can suggest whether it be somebody in a position which is inside and outside, like Dr. AlQadri, or whether it is somebody as Lee to coordinate that, because the prosecutor's office might know that, but they're still thinking as if this is just happening in their domain, whereas this is a statewide phenomena going on because of what we discussed of incentives we intentionally or unintentionally created. And so I think one of the elements of the task force recommendation I would suggest is for some group to be formed within the administration or as a consultant. I can't think out aloud here who that group should be, but a small group which basically coordinates with each one of the agencies. And even if they see their own data back, that listen, 20% of prosecutors are not going to be here, and 14% of CNAs or the RNs are not going to be there. That will create that transparency and self looking through might do us a lot of good. So I think that's just piggybacking of what you were saying, Madam Chair, that I think we should definitely put something like that in our task force recommendation. The other thing which I meant to kind of point out, which is a totally different point, but related to what Dr. AlQadri had mentioned earlier, is about training both in middle management as well as in senior management. And I want to give a kind of an anecdote. When I went at a later stage in life to a public policy program, I ran into one of my colleagues was a person from Australia. And I asked him, and he was maybe in the mid-30s or something like that. I didn't ask him his age, but, and he told me that the government had provided him an opportunity where he paid, I think he paid certain part from his own, but most of it was, the tuition was all funded and he got a 1-year sabbatical or something like that. And I've obviously kept up with him, and he's doing wonderful things back in Australia. But he also told me that not only were people going in public policy, there are people who were out in technology programs because they really felt that the technology infrastructure for the 10 years forward was not going to be the one which they were thinking about, or which people who had been trained to when they got into the government jobs would not be the same. So giving people a year to train for that was a good idea. And I was very impressed. I thought that was forward looking, and it cost, and we were in policy school, so we did a off the back envelope calculation. for the country, it was a few $1 million here and there. It would be a rounding error. But what they were creating was a very motivated workforce. And I think they were doing 30 or 50 slots every year. And they would go everywhere. Some would go to Boston to some college. Some would come to Connecticut, I'm assuming. Some would come to France or wherever. And some would go in Australia. So my idea being that if we were to think about something like that, it has to be something like this task force, think top down and suggest, put something in place for a certain number of folks to basically, also it will attract more people because people will want to go through that program. And while it will cost us something, I understand that, but the kind of, like the presidential fellow program, anybody who goes through that is rock solid. They're going to do great things in life. What about a Connecticut president, governor fellow or something like that? And obviously we can make sure that a lot of other things are, or maybe legislative fellow. Why just governors? I belong to CGA, so nothing. So my point being that we should think about that idea of creating this mid-management and senior management pool of really, which would be from people who have been in our state government for 5-10 years, and with a kind of a some kind of a expectation they would continue when they come back. And they will be very valuable in leadership, and I can see, they will lead not only for our state in the future, but across the area or the region. So that's another thought, which I thought if other members in the task force thought would be a good idea, this would be a really great format for us to propose an idea like that.
Like a state force ROTC, basically, where we bring in people into, give them a full ride through school. What is that going to cost us? $60,000-$70,000 overall. This is peanuts if we compare it to the overall cost of employing somebody for 20 years. If we get to recruit leaders early on and end up spending some money up front to get them through school, which is a public good, which is providing public good to poor kids who probably could not afford school otherwise, and we could really help them get through school, and they'll be taxpayers for life, and we'll recover that money just from the extra taxes they'll be paying as state employees if they end up going to school, to college, and getting a degree and working for the state for, let's say, 5 or 10 years as a commitment. This is an awesome idea. I love it.
Dr. AlQadri, I just wanted to finish up on it. Thank you for that comment on the Australian. I think it's both Australia and New Zealand do that idea, and New Zealand, I think, is a smaller. If we can even compare them to our state in some ways because of the size of the government. But I think those ideas would also, if we don't constrain them in terms of where they can go. But I would like to suggest that they all go to school at your place, but across the country and the world, because it's very hard in later stage in life when somebody in our state government has got to middle school kids. It's just impossible to basically take a year off and to retool yourself with now some really next stage concepts of taking to the cloud if you're in technology, or all of that stuff which we know things are changing. And so if we put that out together, and it creates a lot of loyalty. So I'll leave it there if our task force could kind of coalesce around something like that.
Thank you, Representative Aurora. Ms. Morale, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Representative Aurora. I just wanted to comment. There are similar programs currently in the state of Connecticut. I actually participated in 2. One is the Governor's Aspiring Leaders Program, which was an amazing program. And, I will tell you, I left state government purely because of the salary compression issue and inversion issue. And it was a wonderful program. It was a year-long program. I actually looked at the Silver Tsunami as a project that I did for that program, which I'm happy is now at the forefront and where I'm on the task force to serve it. There's also a management training program that was offered for state employees. That was a year-long program that went everything from hiring, managing, training, coaching, developing colleagues and staff. And I also participate in that program. two unfortunate things occurred. In 2016, my cohort was the last cohort to participate that I'm aware of because of the financial crisis that the state incurred. And so while we were sitting in the program, many of those managers who was in the program developing and preparing for future roles in state government were laid off in the middle of the program. And it really, so that was unfortunate. A couple of agencies were consolidated, and these were really the top leaders, people who were interested in longevity in state government and a career. So they left state service. I did return for a short stint, but they went into the workforce with this credential behind their name that they had worked, that you had been trained in lean process management. I mean, it was across the board, a wonderful program, including the trainers were also laid off through that 2016 crisis. The management training program was another great one that turned to a virtual, literally, essentially, it was reduced to a PowerPoint that managers, if they could find time, could go and read on their own to learn. But it was a year-long program as well, where your director, your commissioner would approve for you to be involved in the program, and then you would bring great ideas, and you would come up with different programs and initiatives. So I think there's an opportunity there to bring life. You just talked about it, back to those programs because they were great. And I think they did identify, and people who were attracted to those programs and nominated for them were people who wanted to be leaders in state government. So I just wanted to add those are resources that we could add back to the toolkit. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of great leaders who were in the middle of their careers who went into the private sector. I actually was recruited out when I got laid off into Deloitte. So that, think about, the experience that was lost from the organization as a result of that.
Thank you for those
Thank
comments.
you. Thank you. I second that. Thank you for those comments. Monica Nugent, madam, you have the floor.
Hi, sorry, just had to go off mute. I just wanted to echo actually some of the same sentiments as a previous speaker. I also went through the Aspiring Leaders program, which was actually cut down from a year to 5 months. And it was a great program, I agree. But I think the problem with Aspiring Leaders, and I don't know how it's been operating in the pandemic, is that the request for nominees goes to the commissioner's office, and the commissioner submits employees who would benefit from the program. So there's not a lot of word of mouth about the program for people that could potentially be interested. Second, there was, I believe, at some point, and Dr. AlQadri, this was before your time, a MPA Fellows program for state employees through the University of Connecticut, where DAS would actually fund a certain amount of students to go through the program. And I know that that was cut, I believe, in either 2015 or 2016 as well. And so that was another type of training program for managers to go through to get their MPA and then continue to work in the state. So I think those programs have existed, but since the financial crisis, they have gone away, but have not been brought back since we are in a surplus now. So I think definitely, including information on that in our recommendations would be useful.
So Monica, just for a quick update, if I may, Representative Porter, if that's okay. The MPA Fellows Program was developed by the University of Connecticut as a state fellows program, it was called. And it was supposed to be funded by the state of Connecticut for about 20 people a year to go through a full management. So the MPA program at UConn is the second in New England in terms of rankings. It is the 10th in the country in public finance, by the way. So it's really this is the top program around the corner from state government. And it does not need more students. I can assure you all, we have more students than we could process, but we're always happy to build capacity there. But the MPA, so when I got here in 2017, we brought back the MPA fellows, and instead of making it a state fellows that's paid for by state government, we made it a self-paying program. So now some agencies, through some union support and through agency support in some cases, end up paying part of the expense. But it is also open to local governments, and it's also open to nonprofit managers as well. So we have been admitting and putting out 25 graduates a year of that program. In fact, Tara Downs, who was with us, is a graduate of that program. She graduated a couple of years ago, and this is and we have a lot of people who are going through the program right now. So we're full cohorts every year. It is now we're no longer relying on state funding for it. It's a self-paying program. It's actually a self-sustaining program. So it pays whatever tuition we get pays for the program.
Yeah, so I also was one of those fellows as well. I have my MPA through UConn as well. So I did do the self-pay program, but I know, as you had mentioned, there was at some point the state help aspect, which I think would be important to get back. But thank you so much for that update.
And we could develop programs like that for the state, I think.
Yes, thank you, Monica, for that, bringing that to the discussion. I thought I saw Mr. Hill's hand up. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to chime in on the heels of Sonia's comments and Monica's comments on aspiring leaders. And I've served as kind of volunteer faculty in the Aspiring Leaders Program for, gosh, I think going back to 2008. And I knew I saw some familiar names on the screen. And it's my experience in that program, which I believe the last time we did it was in 2020, right as the pandemic was unfolding, and that was a virtual class. It was not held this year, but for a very nominal agency fee. I mean, $100 or $200, if my memory serves correctly. It's a terrific training program, low cost, high impact program, and I think I have taught in 12 or 13 different cohorts of that program. And, it was a program that was kind of resource stretched. There was not dedicated resources to coordinating that program. So in terms of management training, and then I'll also kudos to Dr. AlQadri. I've got one of my employees who's in the MP program there at UConn and thinks very highly of it. So I think any of these opportunities where we can have potentially low cost, high reward investments of state resources, whether it's time or money or both or recognition, those are things that I think will be valuable recommendations of this task force.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. I certainly agree with you wholeheartedly. Anytime we can make that kind of investment, I believe that the interest that will be high yield. So I don't see any other questions. I will make one last ditch effort to open the floor for any additional comments. Yes, I knew I'd get somebody. Mr. Livingston, you have the floor.
So I want to thank the last group of speakers about that concept, but I also want to caution us to remember that we're talking about potential. If you go from the 1990s, the level of employment we had in the executive branch down to what some people are expecting after the tsunami, we're talking about something like a 40% loss of human resources. And so while I think some of what we're talking about is really important in terms of leadership development, and then I think when you take that kind of loss and you add what Dan Callahan talked about, which is our difficulty recruiting. So we're not just going to lose folks, but we have hard time getting folks to come work for us. And often they come work for us for a few years and then leave to go to the private sector or go to the municipal sector. So we need to think of wholesale solutions as well. Some of the retail solutions are important, and figuring out ways we can invest a small amount of resources and produce a lot of gain. But I also think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, we need to invest a large amount of resources in protecting the state's greatest asset for its people, which is the workforce that does the work. We're not going to solve this problem with just small investment. we're going to have to think about how we can do the kind of large investment to make up for decades of under resourcing, and now added to all the things that are coming together to make it harder. So I think we need to both think smart and leverage, but we also need to think big because there's a big problem to solve.
You're right, and thank you for making that point, because we certainly are behind the ball. I mean, we've seen it just in this pandemic with the response that some of our agencies have not been able to adequately or sufficiently respond to in the kind of time that people would have liked, you know, to have help. So that's a very solid point you make, Danny. So thank you for that. All right. Well, it is 4:41. We were slotted for 5 o'clock, but with it being the holiday season, I'm sure no one's going to object if we wrap this up a few minutes early. So I will just, you know, thank you all again for making the time, right, to be here today and to be a part of this task force and to help to address what I think we all deem a very pressing issue. And I just want to again thank Dr. AlQadri and Sonia Morale for your presentation and for what you brought to the members today. I also want to remind us, any solutions that weren't made today that may come to you between now and when we meet again on January the 4th. I'm jumping to the 8th. We're not there yet. Just feel free to email any of those recommendations to our labor clerk, Devin Ashlon Smith, and we will keep a compiled list. And we'll just continue to add to that, because our next meeting will be January the 4th, and that will be judicial and higher ed discussion. And let's just remember to think about whatever recommendations we can make with the information that we've gotten so far and what we'll receive going forward. And I think that wraps it up. I will just, for the record, state again, January the 4th will be our next meeting, followed by a meeting on January the 18th, as well as February the 1st, and then a special meeting for February the 8th, where we will discuss a final report and adopt the report and recommendations that we made collectively. All right, and I see, did he leave? I was looking for here he is, Representative Aurora. I see you're still with us, Representative Dan Fox. Any closing remarks you all would like to make, please feel free to do so now.
No, thank you. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas to everyone here, and look forward to seeing everyone in the new year.
All right, thank you. You as well. Representative Fox, is there any comments? He may be doing what we often do, is multitask, jumping in between meetings. So I will just reiterate what Representative Aurora said, that I wish you all a very happy and a merry, whatever it is you celebrate, may it be blissful and beautiful and blessed. And I will see you again January the 4th.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody.